Well, hey guys, what is up? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Austin, and I am so glad that you are here today. And I just want to say, it's been 2 weeks since I made my last video, and since I'm used to making 2 videos a week, it feels like forever ago since we last did that, but I'm really excited to be back making videos today. I have to say the break was really nice. I enjoyed my time at the beach, but I also really missed making these videos and getting to interact with you guys in the comments. So I hope you're maybe like a quarter as excited as I am to be back. And today we are talking about one of my favorite things. We've made several videos like this. They're usually pretty well received, and I really enjoy making them. So I thought it would be a good place to jump back in, and that is we are going to be talking about books. So for the past 2 weeks, I've been at Assateague Island in Maryland, which is just paradise to me. I've been going there ever since I was a little kid. I've spent 2 weeks there every single year of my life, and I absolutely love it. It's an island where you camp on the beach, and I don't use my phone, and pretty much I just sit on the beach, I surf, I read books, make campfires, and pretty much repeat. And so every year I go down with a big stack of books and do my best to read through pretty much as many of them as I can. This year I fell short compared to a couple years previous, but it was a really good year, and I read some really enjoyable books. So we're going to go through this stack of books here. I read 7 books while I was there, and they covered all different kinds of things. We're going to look at some fiction books, which if you've watched my recent videos on books, you'll know that I'm trying to read more fiction this year. I hadn't read it much at all for the past couple years, but I used to really love it, and I decided it would be good to get back into reading fiction because it just works on your mind in different ways, and it's really fun. And I read some great ones this year. I think you'll really enjoy them. I read a couple books on theology, which were great, and then one kind of more on business. I'm going to share all of them with you here shortly. So the first book I want to share with you is called The Cross and the Lynching Tree by James H. Cone. And if you couldn't guess from the title, it is not a light read. It's not a real long book, but reading even a few pages about the history of racism and religion's relationship with that in America is not easy reading. In fact, reading detailed accounts of lynchings in America is heavy, but it was really good to do. It was very educational for me. I learned so much that I just didn't know at all. And I think we all, especially in this time, as this is something that's really been a topic of conversation, we all want to be educating ourselves on our country's history with racism and see like how that is continuing to play out today, and to get a real look and see, are these things that like I didn't even know about, and how can I do something to make sure that legacy doesn't live on in and through me. And so this book, it's going to look at the lynching tree, which is an icon of American racism, as well as the cross, and see how they talk to one another, how they relate, and how we can derive meaning from each one. And I have to say, I wouldn't necessarily agree with every theological conclusion in this book. I don't read a lot of liberation theology, which this would be broadly described as probably black liberation theology, which is a whole wing of theology that if you are mainly in like evangelical circles, you might not even be familiar with at all. And so I really enjoy reading books that stretch me and make me think in different ways, not only about culture, but also about theology. And so while I wouldn't say like read this to learn everything there is to know about the cross and atonement theory, like no, that's not the point of this book, but it was really great. And if you want to take a difficult, hard look at the relationship between religion and racism in America, I think this book is a great one. So The Cross and the Lynching Tree by James H. Cone. All right, the second book in the stack is Brideshead Revisited by Evelyn Waugh. It is a 20th century classic, and the writing is absolutely beautiful. It's fiction, in case you didn't know that, and it covers the story of an aristocratic family in England. The narrator recounts his experience with this family in first person and his complicated relationship with multiple family members, and it's filled with just love stories and love that can't happen, and it's really interesting and it's beautifully written. It reminded me a lot of F. Scott Fitzgerald, who was one of my favorite writers. And I've mentioned this before, but before I became a theology major and was interested in ministry, I seriously considered being an English major for a time before I felt that call to ministry. And so I love good writing. I won't say that it's like necessarily as thrilling as a lot of modern fiction is, but it really reminds me of a time when just writing was so highly valued. It's a little fanciful at times in the writing. It's definitely like a writer's writer in that he writes to hear his own voice sometimes, at which he comments on at the beginning and says he regrets a bit. But I mean, it's a beautiful story. And it also has some interesting points about faith and grace and how that can be really, really messy. That's not like the point of the book, but the family's Catholic faith really does come out in the book many different times and plays a large role for this narrator who's an atheist and is trying to navigate like what is this family's faith and how does that even work. I think it's a really interesting read and I really enjoyed reading it, and if you really just like good literature, then this is a great read. It's a classic and it's not terribly long, and I think you'd really enjoy it. So Brideshead Revisited, check it out. All right, we've got a little more fiction for you next on the pile, and this book, let me tell you, this was fun. I absolutely loved this book, Circe, if I'm saying that right, by Madeline Miller. She is a wonderful writer, and she's also very well schooled in the classics. And this book is about a minor character in the story of the Odyssey, and she just writes this whole world, and you come across all of these common names from Greek mythology and all that, and it's just really great. It was a page turner. I think I read it in, maybe it might not have been a day, but if it wasn't, it wasn't much longer than that. It's absolutely just wonderful. As I was saying, like Brideshead Revisited, the writing's great, a little slower but good. This book, it is not slow. You will love it. I mean, I hope you will. I really loved it. And like I said, trying to read more fiction, and if I'm going to read fiction, I want to read good fiction. This is good. Check it out. I highly, highly recommend it. And that cover is beautiful. Like, I mean, just buy it for that. All right, speaking of beautiful covers, the next book we have, also fiction, the last fiction book on this list, is The 10,000 Doors of January by Alix, Harrow. And I mean, that cover is gorgeous and the spine is too. But not that we're just going to judge the book by the cover, even though that is what everyone does at first. I don't know why they tell you not to do that. Like, you don't have another option. Anyway, but The 10,000 Doors of January, so good. I just read The Starless Sea right before I went on vacation, and this reminded me of that book, except better. Honestly, I loved this book. They did a wonderful job of kind of weaving together two stories, as the main character, the narrator, is telling both her story and then reading a book which is her father's story, and the ways those come together. It's really, really interesting. The writing is wonderful. It reminded me a little bit of C.S. Lewis, the way the narrator kind of breaks that third wall a lot and talks. And the way she writes is, I mean, I just devoured it. I absolutely loved it. The story is wonderful. It transports you to another world. And I have to say, going into this vacation, not that we're going to get into this all right now, but there's been a lot going on in my life, and sometimes fiction is really great to just kind of escape into another world. And not that I want to advocate like escapism and that you always just live in other worlds and don't deal with what's going on in your own life, because that's really important, and got plenty of videos on that kind of stuff. But as we're talking about books, let's just be real. Sometimes on a vacation, it's really nice to just crawl into a story world and live in it for a little bit, especially one as beautifully described as this one. So I would absolutely recommend this book, The 10,000 Doors of January. One of my favorites from this trip. I loved it. I gave it to Eliza. She loved it. So you're gonna love it. Just read it. All right, this is actually the last book that I read while I was on vacation. I have two more to talk about here, but I just stacked them in order of size and hardcover because I'm a little OCD like that. But anyway, Beginner's Pluck by Liz Bohannon. And I really enjoyed this book. I heard her speak at the Global Leadership Summit last year. I bought the book while I was there, and then I just didn't get around to reading it. It was right before I went away to school, and at Moody, I didn't have time for a lot of pleasure reading, although I would always have one book I was reading, but I don't know, this one just never made it back across my shelf. But I'm glad that I got around to reading it because it's really good. The cover is really interesting. You might see it's kind of like this clear cover and then her picture on the inside. So again, if you're judging a book by its cover, kind of interesting. But basically, Liz Bohannon, she is the founder and CEO of Seiko Designs, which is a woman's footwear brand, but also has purses and all kinds of other stuff. But what's really interesting is that they manufacture it in Uganda and employ women there to help them. The original vision was so that they could earn enough money to go to college, because Liz, she went to Uganda and she wanted to help, but she wasn't sure how. She thought business would be the last thing because that just wasn't her. She was a liberal arts major. She thought, this is not me. Like, I'm a journalism major with a minor in gender studies. She's like, not business. But then she found out that she could really help these girls through business, because she found that there was a gap between when they graduated high school and when they got into college. And in that gap, there was a lot of pressure to marry off because your family would get a good bride's price. But she realized that these women, they needed a way to make money so that they could go to college. If they had that money, they could go to college. Then they would have the freedom to make more decisions for themselves and open up a different life for themselves, which is such a cool thing. So she started hiring them to work at this company that she built from the ground up, and she tells the story with just such humor and so many great insights, and she's a wonderful writer. I remembered her speech at the GLS. Her presentation was just fantastic. She's a wonderful communicator with a great story, and the way she writes is so accessible. And if you're not really into self-help, or you're just not into reading nonfiction maybe, well, this is a great introduction because it reads so easily. It's a wonderful book, and she really writes with wit and clarity and a whole lot of humor. So if you're kind of into the memoir self-help genre, you're gonna love this one. If you're not, maybe try it as an introduction. You might really like it. I'm not gonna promise it's like the most deep and like research-based study on how to build a life of passion, but it's really good if you're just looking for an enjoyable read. And it's a read that, although I usually read nonfiction with a pen and underline things, you certainly could. In these books, this genre that aren't as like analytical, I really like reading them almost as just surrounding yourself with interesting people, hearing their story and kind of getting a feel for what they've done and how they've done it. It's not one I took a ton of notes on, but it's like you got to sit down for a really long coffee with Liz Bohannon and hear her story, and I really enjoyed that. I read it in a day. You can too, not super long and super easy read, but well worth it. I really enjoyed it. Alright, the last two books for you guys are Return to Theology, and they get a little more deep. Certainly the second one does. But the first one was On the Road with St. Augustine by James K.A. Smith. And as we talk, like, covers, they're killing it this year. Good work. Really, really interesting cover. But anyway, James K.A. Smith, he is one of my favorite Christian authors of the last year or so. I had never heard of him before I went to Moody, and then I read his book, You Are What You Love, devoured that, loved it so much that I read his more technical, more scholarly book, Desiring the Kingdom, and was absolutely floored by it. I mean, I absolutely loved that book. There was so much thought-provoking insight from that book that really caused me not only to be more reaffirmed in some things I believe, but challenged me in other ways and caused me to think differently about different things. And oh my goodness, he is brilliant, and he did not disappoint with this book, On the Road with St. Augustine. It's not necessarily a book about St. Augustine, so if you're looking for like a biography, there's a great one from him. I believe it's by Peter Brown is his name, but this is kind of his story. He did his PhD on St. Augustine, and it's his story of kind of interacting with his ideas, and it's inviting you on that journey, because so much of Augustine's writings, they kind of read like a journey, specifically Confessions, which is his most popular and famous writing, which I'm currently reading now most mornings. But this book, it really just causes you to realize that the problems you're having, or the things you're facing, or the questions you're wrestling with, they're not new to you. In fact, they've been thought about for a long time. And St. Augustine, despite being from the 4th century, is incredibly relatable in this book. And the way that James K. Smith goes through his thoughts and kind of relates them to your life and his life is really, really interesting. If you're into theology, if you want to learn a little more about St. Augustine and just his way of thinking, and the intersection of our faith with our culture relates to times previous, well, this is a great read. And really, I underlined so much of this book. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope you will too. So On the Road with St. Augustine by James K. Smith. All right, they say you save the best for last. I don't know how I compare N.T. Wright to Liz Bohannon and Alix Harrow. They are just very, very different, but I will say that this book, wow, what a book. Unlike the books that I read in a day, this book is probably the reason that I didn't finish the other books that I brought, that and pesky things called conversations. But this book, wow, it is deep, it is rigorous, but it is incredible. I have read a lot of N.T. Wright, and I guess I should tell you the title by now. It's History and Eschatology, Jesus and the Promise of Natural Theology. It is from the 2018 Gifford Lectures, which are a series of lectures on natural theology, and N.T. Wright was the first New Testament scholar to be invited to lecture on this since Rudolf Bultmann in the mid-20th century. So that might have put you to sleep already, and that's okay. I kind of saved this for last, well, A, because it was the thickest and it went well at the bottom of the pile, but also because I was afraid if I talked about this book at the beginning, some of you might just fall asleep on me. Which is fine, I guess. If you left the browser open, it would give me a longer view time. Anyway, no, I'm just kidding. But seriously, this book, it's not easy. It covers so much. It is really, as some have described it, N.T. Wright's crowning achievement. I mean, he pulls together so many things here. He pulls together his side of New Testament scholar and his work on the resurrection, his historical studies. He pulls in a lot of his Second Temple Judaism expertise, but he also discusses philosophical movements and how they have shifted over time and how some of our current thought patterns are not just modern, but they actually reflect ancient Greek and Roman ways of thinking, like Epicureanism. He spends a lot of time on the relationship between Epicureanism and the modern dichotomy of heaven and earth, between secular and sacred, between the supernatural and the, I mean, he really opens up a can of worms, but then puts it all together in a masterful way. It is really an accomplishment. I was quite impressed. As someone who loves good scholarship, as someone who is a real nerd when it comes to theology, I have to say, if he was in the room, I would have given him a standing ovation. I love his stuff, but this was impressive. I say reader beware. Lots of big words, not an easy read, but if you want to get to know N.T. Wright and his thinking, this is a great place to go to. I thoroughly recommend it. And I really enjoyed the way he challenged the common and the predominating ways of doing natural theology. If you're not familiar with natural theology, most of the time that means kind of using reasoning faculties to think of and prove, if you will, or give affirmation to belief in God. So you look at nature and you look at logic and reason and you kind of try to reason your way to God, which is the way it's usually done. And I've participated in some of that. It's helped shape some of my thinking. But he turns it on its head in a lot of ways. I'd be really curious to know how it was received when he gave the lectures, because it is quite a veer off into right field from the usual way of doing it, but it was fascinating. And he basically says, well, if everyone's going to relegate Jesus to just some great teacher in history, but we agree he's a historical figure, then he shouldn't be off limits for natural theology. In fact, history itself needs to not be off limits, because history is part of the natural world that our concepts have put together. And anyway, I'm not going to be able to summarize this in the next 2 minutes, but it's phenomenal. Take a look at it, and I think you'll really enjoy it. So there you guys have it. Those are the books that I read while on vacation, and some of them were really light, some were deep. When I was reading this one, Eliza, my girlfriend, told me you're not supposed to read books like that on vacation, but clearly she just doesn't have good book taste. Just kidding. But these are the books I read. I hope you enjoyed them, and I want to thank you so much for watching this video. Truly, that means so much to me. I also wanted to say real quick, while I was gone, we cleared 500 subscribers. That's so cool. To each and every one of you that have subscribed and have been sharing these videos with your friends, liking, commenting, just getting the word out about this, you guys are the best. It is such an honor to see people believe in this vision and believe in what we're doing here. And if you're new, this channel, Gospel Simplicity, well, what we're all about is the good news about Jesus. We're out to talk about life, Jesus, and the journey of faith in a real, honest, and open way. And apparently that's something 500 people are excited about. And I can't thank you guys enough. Seriously, it means so much to me. Thank you to each and every one of you. If you want to join the fam, then hit subscribe. You can be a part of what we're doing here on this channel. But until next time, guys, be on the lookout for more videos. And as always, go out and love God and love others, because truly, above all else, that will change the world. Peace. I love you guys so much. I'll see you next time.